All right. Well, welcome to our last session of the day. There still is a tour of our Capitol building later for any of you who are interested, but right now we're going to talk about a really important topic, and that is how do we build these cooperative groups? How do we build these organizations that can work together in a way that can make all of this stuff real for us? We're really excited to have the folks who are on this panel, and I'm going to introduce Randy, and I'm going to butcher your last name, Randy, Groberger, and he's going to introduce himself. You know, all summit long, we've had folks that I've worked with over the years, and I don't have any experience with interstate compacts, so I haven't worked with these folks, but I'm really excited to hear from them because this is one of the things I want to learn a lot about. So Randy, I'm going to turn it over to you, let you introduce yourself and your panel. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's always interesting to be the last panel of a 5-day conference. I don't know how many of you were here yesterday, but I did have the opportunity by coming in Tuesday night to sit in on some sessions yesterday, and I learned more about feral swine at a rail conference than I thought. I probably will never, go there again. I mean, there are a few feral cats that I'm familiar with, and when we were in Hawaii on our honeymoon, my wife and I played golf, and we had feral roosters running out onto the greens of some of the nicest golf courses in Hawaii, but feral swine, that was a new one. I am just going to go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Randy Groberger. I'm the senior rail consultant with Quandl Consultants. I've been with Charlie Quandl and his team now since, about 2.5 years. Prior to that, I had the privilege and the opportunity to be the project director for Colorado's Front Range Passenger Rail Commission. Spencer Dodge, my good friend Spencer, and I since then have gone to the dark side and are both on the consulting side of things, but that was a great project and a great opportunity. Today we are going to be talking about interstate compacts. I don't have any experience in that, but the folks on this panel certainly do. And I'm going to, again, we're doing things just a little bit differently here. We're not going to, read a bio to you for each one of them. I'll introduce them and let them sort of make a self-introduction, and then they'll make a short presentation. We'll do that 3 times. Then I have some prepared questions for the panel. And then at the end, we'll take some questions from the audience if time allows. Some of the agendas that we saw floating around suggested that this was a 30-minute panel or a 45-minute panel. Nope, you're stuck with us for a full hour. We may get done earlier than that, and if so, there's plenty of other things to do this afternoon, but we're going to anticipate trying to hold your attention for about 60 minutes. So at this point, I'm going to introduce Laura Cleaver. Laura will introduce herself and describe her background and experience, and then give you a lot of really good information about interstate compacts.
Good afternoon, and thanks for sticking around. My name is Laura Cleaver. I'm with the Midwest Interstate Passenger Rail Commission. Our commission in the Midwest is this 12-state commission. I'll tell you more about it in a minute. But I was both on the staff that helped develop the compact and was asked to serve as its director, and I've served as its director for 23 years now. It was enacted in 2000. So I'll talk to you today a little bit about our commission, and perhaps I've been talking with a lot of, I didn't realize so many legislators were going to be here. So I've caught every legislator I can just to let them know a little bit about what a compact can do and why they may want to consider it. And so that's me.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Dan Loxton. I'm the director of the National Center for Interstate Compacts at the Council of State Governments. I'll tell you more about the Council of State Governments during my presentation, but appreciate the invitation. I too learned a lot this week. I didn't go to the feral hogs, although I stayed with I stayed with the rail stuff. I've actually never ridden a train before. So and I've never ridden a horse, which is weird being from Kentucky. So thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Kat Dobbs and I am with HDR Engineering. I am a senior environmental project manager for HDR. And I am also the high-speed and intercity passenger rail practice lead for HDR. I have sort of a long history with exclusively rail. I have ridden a train and I'm really excited to be here. We're going to talk about the interstate compacts. I know many of you actually from my prior career. I have also since joined the dark side, but I was actually with the Federal Railroad Administration in its Washington, D.C. headquarters for almost 12 years. And the part of the country that I managed when I was at the FRA was the South Central and later turning into the Central region. So that would include the Gulf Coast area where Mr. John Robert did a lot of work and continues to do a lot of work. And also the Midwest area where the commission is so active. So we're really excited to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Laura?
Thank you, Randy. So it occurred to me when I told you all that I talked to a bunch of legislators when I was here, why would I want to do that? Well, the compact is an agreement among states that basically the compact decides who can be members, but states are members. So that means that states have to enact the compact in each state. And legislators are the ones that it goes through. It goes through both chambers. You have to have sponsors, you have to have supporters, you have to have the whole chamber pass it in both houses, and then it goes to the governor and for his or her signature. So we have been really blessed in the Midwest. Rhyme, blessed in the Midwest. I love it. To have been able to work together as a region through our state DOTs and through our compact. And I want to describe a little bit for you how we've done that, because as you've seen, and you'll hear a little bit more, Congress gave interstate compacts a special grant program. They want to encourage compacts. FRA ideally would like to work not only with individual states, but with regions to really build out its national rail plan. The FRA is responsible for that national rail plan. So working with regions, we in the Midwest have worked with the FRA already and are taking that further. And ours was developed through legislators, I work for the Council of State Governments, actually also. I'm in the Midwestern office. And we were asked by a group of legislators to help them figure out how to work together better on passenger rail back in the late 90s. And through a series of meetings and conversations with a bunch of people, it was decided that a compact would be the way to go. So it took a while. It took a while of convening. We had a summit. We brought advocates. We brought legislators. We brought federal, state, and local officials to work together. And this is how our compact is framed, and why it might be a good template for the Northwest. And I say template, I don't say, you adopted exactly the same, but that you can see how we structured it fairly broadly so that it gives you a framework over time to expand, to move, to grow in evolution of what you are as a compact. So there's various aspects of the compacts that we have, but the overall basic purpose of the Midwest Interstate Passenger Rail Compact Commission, the commission is what was created via the compact, is through member states and partners to promote, coordinate, and support passenger rail service improvements. We develop and implement plans and improvements advocate for Midwestern interests in the passenger rail development, support our member state DOTs. That's a key point, has always been for us. We're not trying to do something outside. We might want to encourage them and work with them, but we're not going to ever do a project apart from what the states agree to. And we've also taken leadership in the FRA-led regional planning efforts. So MIPIRC has things that there's duties in the compact, and all compacts usually have this. You lay out what are the duties. These are the things the commission must do. We had to adopt bylaws, expend funds, etc. We must advocate, we must seek partnerships, development of a long-term plan, which is what we are in the midst of right now. Cooperate with other agencies, regions, and entities to ensure the Midwest is adequately represented. That's what the commission must do. There's also powers that are given to the commission, things that it can do. So there's functional aspects of establishing an office, etc., and policy aspects. I want to point to the last bullet. If requested by states and under the terms of a formal agreement, implement or provide oversight for specific rail projects. So that was put in there specifically to assure states and state DOTs that we would need to have their formal agreement in order to move forward with any specific rail project. So for MIPIRC, 3 states had to initially enact the compact for it to be effective in coming into being. That happened in 2000. We currently have 8 member states, Illinois, Indiana, Kansas, Michigan, Minnesota, Missouri, North Dakota, and Wisconsin. And there are 3 other states that are also eligible to join the compact, including South Dakota, who has never had passenger rail service, but we had the foresight to say, hey, you know, they might in the future. And there has been some interest recently from South Dakota in exploring some things. So another important thing about our compact that I think is something to replicate is that we have legislative involvement. 2 legislative appointments, 1 from each chamber, and 2 gubernatorial appointments. The reason I say that is because legislators are going to be important to this process for your whole life of what you do, and to educate them, to get them to be advocates, to have them work with us. It's been important in states like Indiana, especially important, and other states too, like Illinois or Michigan, that they're already have been on board from the beginning. So we bring together state leaders from across the Midwest on a bipartisan basis to promote the growth and development of passenger rail. For 15 years was educating members of Congress, getting that foundation of funding and programs, and with the FAST Act for the first time that happened. We work very closely with our member state DOTs, as I mentioned before, and we educate and coordinate with legislators. So here's some of the things that we've done. I'm not going to go into great detail about that because that's not the purpose, but we've done a lot. This is just some very basic things. I would consider us key in getting that within, you'll hear about the corridor ID from Catherine, that we said to the FRA, some of our states they don't have money for rail. So they can't give you a match, at least at the beginning. They need to be able to work and show that something is doable before they will then invest. And so now you have the $500,000 for that no match is required. First time in federal history, FRA history that they did that. We're also working on refining a plan that we did with the FRA that was released in 2021. We have an active current Chrissy grant application to further refine so that what we do in the Midwest is we approach things as a network. So that's what's the benefit too of a compact, is that yes, you're all doing things in your states, but you need to look at things as a region and a network, and how do things connect and how can things connect, and come up with a regional plan. And that's what I think would be helpful for this region, and lots more to say, but I just wanted to go through some aspects of why it might be good for the Northwest to consider that. And we'd be glad to be a resource ongoing for you. Here's my contact, here's our contact information.
Thank you, Laura. Dan, now do you want to share a few thoughts on
Sure.
your work with the National Center?
Yeah. No, you're fine. All right. Hey, good afternoon. I run the Compact Center at the National Center for Interstate Compacts at the Council of State Governments. The Council of State Governments is a membership organization for states. We were founded in 1933 at the University of Chicago. We ran out of space in 1967. They didn't want to give us any more space, so all the states bid on where the Council of State Governments would go, and Kentucky won, which is why somebody with my accent is sitting up here talking with you. We serve all three branches of government, so we're not just legislative, we're not just executive branch. We serve all three of the branches. We've got 4 regions that work primarily with legislators, but not exclusively. And then we have the CSG Justice Center, which is located in New York, and it works with states on criminal justice issues. So that's a little bit about CSG. And like I said, the Compact Center, it was founded in 2004. We've worked on interstate compacts since our founding back in the 30s. We don't own interstate compacts. No one owns interstate compacts. They're just a contract. Anybody can do them, but we've worked on them longer than anyone else. So these, when you hear compact, you should think of a contract. So these are just legislatively enacted agreements among the states or between 2 states. They can be used for bilateral issues, and they can be used for regional or national. There's about 265 active compacts. They've been around since before the founding of the Republic. Up until the early 1920s, they were mainly used for state boundaries and access to, waterways or access to other sort of environmental or economic, like ports or those types of things. In 1922, New York and New Jersey created the first administrative compact for New York Harbor, and it's still in existence today. So it's over 100 years old. These things are very powerful. I'm not here to try to convince you to do an interstate compact. That should really be dictated by, the circumstances. You can start down the road to create a compact, and then, there's off ramps, and decide that, well, actually, this would work better with this type of agreement. These are binding, powerful agreements. Compacts, the provisions of an interstate compact supersedes conflicting state law. Now, typically, they're in a policy area that's very narrow, but that's something everyone needs to go into these things with their eyes open. And I'll get to I think they're the gold standard as far as state cooperation, but not every issue requires one. If you're if you're a hammer, every problem's a nail. You don't want to approach every problem to do an interstate compact. Kind of touched on this. So the benefits is they do create the environment for states to collectively and cooperatively work on issues. One of the great things about compacts is they allow states to sort of combine and use economies of scales. There is provisions in there for federal participation. So a lot of times Congress will give the states an opportunity to deal with an issue through an interstate compact. And, then when they've decided the states aren't going to follow through, they'll pass a federal law. I mentioned Kentucky and horses earlier. Congress authorized a compact for drugs in horse racing. And gave the states about 6 years to deal with it. The states never could agree on anything, and so they passed the federal law. So, Congress likes these things because a lot of times they want to pass the buck to the states and say, you figure it out for yourself. And if they can't do that, then obviously they'll pass the federal law. They also, it's not fair to expect Congress to account for the vagaries of the states, but if you get Idaho and Oregon and Washington and Arkansas and Kentucky around the table, they'll look out for their own interest and they'll find a way to create language that can account for that as much as possible. Everybody will walk away a little bit happy and a little bit unhappy. So, when Congress passes a law, they can't do that. So it does sort of dictate a regime onto you where compacts can alleviate that. Okay, so I am so proud. I got a bunch of 20-year-olds that work for me, and I didn't ask them to help me with this. So I hope you like it. Because, I didn't want them to work on the weekend. But again, these are powerful, and to my mind, they are the gold standard as far as state cooperation. But they take time to create, and they cost money to create. So, again, that should be at the forefront of your thought before you go into this. And again, you can sort of start down the road about, well, we haven't really decided, but we'll sort of, approach this as if we're going to do a compact. And then, I don't know, maybe a year or 2 years into it, you decide, no, we don't need anything like that. We're going to do this. Or you may decide that you do need it. So, you're not taking a blood oath just because you start down that road. But again, right now we're working on a lot of these occupational licensure compacts, and I won't bore you with occupational licensure law, but they're all essentially, you can't take the OT compact and everywhere it says occupational therapist, insert counselor. And it just doesn't work like that. But if you looked at the OT compact and the compact for counselors, they would look remarkably the same. And it takes about a year to do those. That's because we've done 15 of them. For a project like this, you're looking at years. So now, that's not to say you can't find efficiencies and you couldn't speed it up. But again, this is a big time commitment and it's a money commitment. So I just want to be, upfront with everybody. These are great, but it's a lot of effort. The process of creating one. So I apologize for this slide, but that's the process when we start putting pen to paper. And again, it can be adjusted. Laura and I were talking earlier. There's so much work that has to go into this before you get to the writing process. And the great thing about the process, though, is that it can build, collaboration. It can build sort of this cooperative atmosphere around a project. And states can participate in the process without necessarily ever intending to join, or maybe they're going to join after they see it get stood up, the DOT's against it, or well, the legislature's a problem, but they're okay if we participate. You can still allow people to have a seat at the table, but even though if they're not going to enact it maybe for a while, or there's some different challenges there. But this whole process is built again to sort of develop that collaboration. Also, and another interesting thing about interstate compacts is once they get to the legislature, they can't change them. They can't change them substantively. You got some states, Maryland has a law in the books, don't ask me why, you can't say shall not, it has to be may not, just whatever. Those types of things can be done, right? But any substantive change, it can't be made. And, you have to walk them through that part of it. And that's why, we do so much work on the front end there. So we'll have a group that'll sort of help us work out the broad parameters. Then we'll write it. Then we take it out for months of stakeholder review so that everyone can see it. And the reason that we do that is so that when it gets to the legislative part, they're comfortable that this thing's been vetted and that people's positions have been taken into account. I think legislators generally are used to hearing people come into their office and say, I don't like this bill. I think where they get concerned, and where I would get concerned, if someone comes into their office and says, they wrote this in a back room, they didn't include us, nothing that we told them ever made it through, and you should be very careful about enacting this. So that's why you have to have this open, transparent process. So again, look forward to answering your questions, and I'll turn it over to Kat.
All right, thank you so much. So I have just a few slides, and we've had a great overview of a very successful example of an interstate compact specifically for rail. And we've had a lot of great information about the practicalities and the logistical considerations that go into making an interstate compact. What I want to focus on is a little bit of a shift. I want to talk about why we might want to consider making an interstate compact, specifically as it relates to the federal funding opportunities that exist today for intercity passenger rail. I view the potential for an interstate compact through two different lenses. It is both a funding opportunity and an opportunity to enter yourself into a pipeline for funding. But it is just one of many tools that are available to stakeholders who are interested in passenger rail development. So I'll talk a little bit first about sort of what I would consider the low-hanging fruit. We have a little bit of a timing issue here as it relates to this conference and this particular funding opportunity. But I would be remiss if I did not outline the fact that the IIJA, or the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, created a specific funding opportunity for existing interstate rail compacts to compete for and pursue federal funding specifically for the interstate compact functions. Now, this is a little bit different and a little bit noteworthy from the multitude of other federal funding opportunities related to rail, because whereas many of the infrastructure bill's programs focus on project development and project delivery, things like preliminary engineering and NEPA and final design and construction, things that are specifically tied to a project, the interstate compact funding opportunity focuses on providing funding and the opportunity for funding specifically for an existing interstate passenger rail compact. So what that means is that a compact can ask for funding to support the compact itself and to help the compact engage in its business that furthers the pursuit of passenger rail opportunities. And the pursuit of passenger rail opportunities, very noteworthy, includes the pursuit of federal funding. And you might be saying, okay, yes, it's a NOFO. The NOFO closed. It closed on July 10th, so just about a week and a half ago. So what? We missed it. Why do we care? Well, I would argue to you that there are billions of reasons that we should care about a new opportunity to be given money to pursue federal money, because we all know that the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law is a game changer, and that there is really an unprecedented level of funding that is available for intercity passenger rail service. What we have seen in the almost 2 years since the infrastructure bill has passed, however, is that it is not a one-size-fits-all program. It's not even just one program that provides funding for intercity passenger rail. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Law provides funding to many programs that already existed within the FRA and the US DOT, and then created new and separate programs to be administered by the US DOT and the FRA. It is a complex and complicated landscape for a stakeholder or an entity that is interested in pursuing passenger rail funds. This is just a snapshot of some of the money that is available and some of the programs that are available that facilitate the improvement of existing intercity passenger rail service, or that are available for the development of new passenger rail services. The commonality amongst all of these, and anyone who has read a NOFO recently or had the distinct pleasure of preparing an application for federal funding in response to a NOFO, is that they are nuanced and they are complicated and they are not to be taken with a grain of salt. Laura and I were just talking about the difficulties, even for veterans, right? To put together a response and to ensure that you have the proper components in your application, that you have the right benefit cost analysis. Each of these programs has different nuances, slightly different eligibility requirements, and slightly different policy and project focuses. So I outline all of that, not to scare everyone, but to underscore the importance and the significance of having funding available to support an interstate compact in trying to go through, prioritize, and strategize for a project or a set of projects along a corridor, and have a new point of entry into what I would call the FRA pipeline. And I like this slide a lot. Full disclosure, I absolutely stole this from the FRA. But the reason that I stole it from the FRA is because I think it does a really fantastic job of providing an illustration to the way that the different FRA programs could fit together for the development of intercity passenger rail service or a new corridor. And it kind of shows that what I would call the different points of entry, because it's not just about an applicant, be it an interstate compact or otherwise. And it's not really just about the type of project that you have. It's a really interesting kind of mix of the applicant and the project and where that project is in its developmental life cycle. So what I see the potential for, and if I could add a bar to this FRA graphic, I would put a long bar maybe at the top that just shows the ability for the interstate compact, establishing an interstate compact, and then receiving that funding. I view it as a point of entry into the pipeline, but it's not the dictating point of entry, right? Because what is the dictating point of entry, in my point of view, is that confluence of applicant and project development for the specific corridor. And I think that one of the advantages of starting the process of creating an interstate corridor is that it really has the opportunity to help coalesce all of the different stakeholders that are involved and that want to have a voice in developing a new passenger rail service. And it will help set the stage and the groundwork for creating that strategy that is so important to being successful in the federal funding arena. It'll help inform where you're going to enter the pipeline and what phase of project development is best and most competitive for whatever funding program it is that you're going for. And as we all know, there is usually a funding program open at any given time, at least right now. And, we're not complaining. We love it as an industry, but it's a lot to wrap your head around. So one of the things that I wanted to focus on and wanted to ensure that we talked about is that this is an interstate passenger rail compact panel, and that's what we're here to talk about. And I said it before, and I would want to emphasize again that interstate passenger rail compacts are just one point of entry into the FRA pipeline. But I would suggest that once you're in the pipeline with the FRA, be it as an interstate compact, as an individual state, or as any of the other eligible entities or recipients for the funding through the US DOT or the FRA, that it really becomes more about the process and the project development expectations that are going to be placed on the compact or the eligible applicant overall. And this slide is a lot, and I know that it is. I put it together and I still look at it and think it's a lot. But I like to use it because I think it does a good job of demonstrating the sort of two categories that I think the work tends to fall in. And when I say work, I mean work that a grantee has to be prepared to contribute toward to be successful as a grantee with the FRA. So the dinner plate on the right is more what I would call the project development work that relates specifically to the corridor. So some of those categories align well with the categories of, I'll say, technical expertise or maybe subject matter expertise that the FRA is going to expect you to provide in support of the passenger rail corridor. So things like NEPA and project development, permitting, stuff like that. The bulleted list on the left is more what I would consider, and I think it's honestly equally important, but it's more what I would consider the project management and the administrative requirements that any grantee is expected to meet and maintain in order to keep their good standing with the FRA. So regardless of whether you're an interstate compact or you're a state or city, whatever eligible entity you are, there are going to be administrative and project management requirements that are placed upon you, right? And this is sort of just a sampling of one of those. And, I said it before, I'll say it again, it's a lot, but the one thing that I would want to underscore is that I really feel like it takes a village to develop these new passenger rail services, but that's because they're going to serve villages, right, for years to come. And just looking around this room and seeing the wealth of expertise, like I can't underscore the need to collaborate more, I think, than it already has been. But that's really what it's all about. I mean, there is a wealth of technical expertise and expertise, excuse me, and a wealth of experience that, groups like Laura's can offer, regardless of the standing of an interstate compact or not. I feel like we are all in this together, and we are all here because we want intercity passenger rail to be successful, and because we want to see interstate passenger rail and new services, be developed and delivered in this country. So I would only end to say that we are all here to help each other, and I will speak for all of us when I say we are all happy to answer any questions you might have.
Okay, thank you, panel. I've got a couple prepared questions for these panelists, but before I ask them those questions, I want to ask you all a question. Has anybody in this room heard an acronym in the last couple days that they weren't familiar with? I don't see any hands, but I hear a lot of laughing. Well, I've got another one for you. I'm not sure you've heard this. It's one of my favorite acronyms. Does anybody know what the acronym TLA stands for? That stands for three-letter acronym. Okay, we're moving right along now to the questions that I have for the panel. And you can decide which order you want to take these in, but the first question is, what is key language that you'd recommend be included in the development of an interstate compact? Laura, you're grabbing the mic.
Yeah,
Like you're gonna take the first shot.
take a stab on it, at it. I think I'm going to answer that first by saying what it should not be. Interstate compact should not have. I would strongly discourage the development of an interstate compact for a specific corridor, for one specific corridor, or even two specific corridors. The energy and the what it takes to develop and get a interstate compact enacted, it's not worth it. I mean, the joint power authority, can be done for that kind of thing. What I think when I went through was encouraging you all to be broad enough that you can look. We're looking at 40 years from now in the Midwest. And we did that by getting a partnership with the FRA to develop what's called the Midwest Regional Rail Plan. And it's a 40-year kind of bird's eye view of what the Midwest lines would look like. Some conventional rail, some higher speed rail, and some what I call very high speed rail, which would be dedicated track. But that you are broad enough to allow for that, both in who you allow to be included in the compact. Some of you, even I've talked with, even internationally, you might want to talk about there's ways that the provinces, your provinces could be involved as well, whether it perhaps is not a direct member, but some kind of associative or advisory or cooperative. There's ways to do that. I would also say that, look over MIPIRC's compact. I mean, seriously, just read through it, because it might not take you, as I know Dan's saying, it's a long and hard process, but if you at least use ours as a template, we already went through that long and hard process, and it's worked pretty darn well, I have to say. Though there's a couple things that I might say that I would include, like I might, if I was doing it today, I might have a state DOT as a direct commissioner. We have 2 gubernatorial appointments, either the governor or his or herself, and a private sector. The governor's appointee is 80% of the time they appoint the head of the DOT. So that's great. And they then usually have a designee, that someone in the rail officer who works on passenger rail come to the actual meetings and work with us on a day-to-day basis. But it's not always guaranteed. And some of the states that we don't have the DOTs directly on the commission, it's been I always include them, it's harder because they don't have actual, vote. They can't be officers, things like that. So I think those are, and like all being said, if you look at MIPIRC and adopt something like it for your states, taking into consideration some of the ways you might want to broaden it, and others can advise on that as well, but that's what I would say.
Okay. Dan or Kat?
You want to be clear about the withdrawal provisions. Compacts, essentially you get out. They're not like the Hotel California. You can actually leave at some point. The older I get, the less that joke lands. But anyway, essentially states vote themselves out the way they voted themselves in. But you want to be explicit about that. You also, and you don't want to be explicit about this, but you want to give the commission a clear charge to determine, like, well, what are your responsibilities? So you just can't leave, right? So you want to be clear about those types of things, so states know what they're getting into. And then the other thing I would mention is dispute resolution is important. You don't want states going to federal court every time they're angry about something. You want a dispute process in the compact that's laid out in the compact. Then ultimately everybody has a right to go to court if they want to, but you want to try to handle those internally. And Laura talked about language and keeping it broad. I mean, you want the compact to be evergreen, and the way it can do that is through its rulemaking. But you don't want to create these things that they're so broad that legislators are concerned and governors are concerned about enacting them. But if you make them too narrow, at some point in the future, you're just going to choke it to death, because the commission won't be able to write rules around that explicit language. So those are some of the things I keep in mind.
Yeah, I would only add less to specific language and more to intent as it relates to the federal funding opportunities, is to not, or to be cautious of being overly prescriptive in the pursuit of a specific opportunity that we know of right now, or the specific programs that we know of right now, with the understanding just what Dan said. I mean, these are evergreen, and we want them to be broad enough to be useful in crafting an approach for a specific opportunity for rail. But we need to understand that those opportunities for rail are going to change, and that some of the opportunities that we know of today are going to sunset at some point, and new programs that we don't know of today are going to be introduced. And we want an interstate compact to give us the maximum flexibility, give the member states the maximum flexibility to craft an approach for each opportunity and each of the projects along the corridor that are most appropriate and most tailored to the specifics of the project and the specifics of the opportunity. It doesn't make sense for a two-state coalition to necessarily pursue a station in one city. It might make more sense for the city to pursue the station, just as an example.
And if just one quick follow-up as well, I said this during my presentation, but I feel that legislative involvement is a critical aspect, so that some part of the commission membership from each state should be legislative.
Okay, thank you. Second question. And we may have already covered this sort of in everybody's presentations, but what would you describe as the key advantage of having an interstate rail compact? Kat, you want to go first on this one?
I do think I mentioned this, but it's worth a little bit more discussion. I see the key advantage of creating an interstate compact. It's probably not what you think I'm going to say. It's not actually that there's money available to help fund interstate compacts. I think that is helpful for the existing interstate compacts, but in the grand scheme of federal money, it's not the biggest carrot I think that's out there. Where I think the real value comes in for an interstate compact is setting the strategy energy and that forward-looking, long-term vision for what passenger rail can be for an entire region. I view it, and this we've mentioned a couple times, I view it as much less project specific and more agenda focused in establishing the agreement to agree on how passenger rail is important to a region and how there will be collective efforts in the future to pursue efforts as appropriate.
Totally agree with Kat, and would just emphasize that you have an opportunity to, as a compact commission, facilitate your whole region speaking as one voice on certain things. We did that through letters to Congress that were from our whole compact commission. We've done that when we gave input into several programs. The FRA had a process that they asked for input at different things, including we've been very active on the long distance service program, that service study that the FRA is doing, very active in the Midwest. And we were able to facilitate when they asked for input in between the first and second workshops to have all of our member states agree on certain lines that we felt were the most important for our region to restore. And that's a big, it's a big number, you know, all those states working together and saying it with one voice. And sure, you can do that through other means, but you have dedicated staff helping to facilitate it. I mean, it's taken me years to develop relationships with some of the entities within each state, and it's been a process. But we're at like the sweet spot right now with our commission.
I really don't have anything.
Okay.
Okay, the schedule that Bree provided to us last Friday when we had a little bit of a conference call to set this panel up. And Bree, thank you again for herding these cats, and you've done a great job with this whole conference. But that schedule said that at 2:25, we were to begin audience participation, and my phone says it's 2:29. So we've already shortened you by about 4 minutes. I would imagine that this audience has some questions for this panel. And if there are microphones in the room and we can circulate those, we'll certainly ask. This is the first hand that I saw back here.
Do you want to use one of the microphones and we'll share this one?
Has everybody had a good time in Boise? Yeah.
Great. Hi,
Absolutely.
thanks. My question is this. Entities spanning states, in the creation of these entities, there are potentially other agencies, let's just call it random DOT, that sees a potential compact as a competitor for funding, and as a competitor for power. Now, I heard briefly from the MIPRC that you have connections with the governor's office and with the DOT. And dealing with IDOT, I imagine that a lot of these concerns have been assuaged in some way or another. But when we're dealing with new states that see some of the challenges and see these new agencies as potential unknowns, how do we overcome some of the hesitancy, and how do we overcome the idea of creating another independent agency where, say, if some states where you have large transit agencies that are seen as direct competitors to DOTs, and they don't want to create yet another entity where they have to share that power, even though this gives us long-term vision and it gives us so many other benefits. How do we get past that?
Well, I can speak to when we were having the Midwest Compact enacted, it took 3 states initially. Those 3 states did it really quickly. But it was what some of our smaller states actually was Indiana, Minnesota, and Nebraska. It took quite a while longer to get Michigan and Illinois, and that was because of the DOT's concern that we would be encroaching on them. And it just took persistent showing that we weren't going to, and that the compact actually prevents us to, but you got to have, I don't know, I don't want to, it's not me, it's everybody in the compact working together, but I was committed to ensuring that our state DOTs are in it all the way, all the time. And we had to pull some kicking and screaming. And I don't think my Michigan friend, who now works for Quandel, but used to be the head of rail in Michigan Office of Rail, would mind my saying, but he strongly advised Michigan not to join the compact back in the early 2000s. They did it anyway. He eventually became one of our strongest advocates, and in fact was a longtime chair of our commission. So it's relationships, and it is working and showing that you are there on a bipartisan, you don't have your own agenda, you have an agenda that for the states.
So you can diffuse some of that during the process. You include them so that they can see, that their concerns maybe, aren't what they were concerned about actually is going to be in the language. And, the compact defines its role. So to the extent that you can make the language work, you can preclude it from doing certain things if that's a sticking point. Yeah, and you can give them a seat at the table. I mean, obviously, governor and legislature have to have appointments, but you could have, ex officios to some extent. So I mean, there's ways you can do it depending on how many states are going to join. You have early adopters that want in on the ground floor, and then you'll have states that, well, they want to see it actually. Laura mentioned her number was 3. They want to see it get to that level. And then you'll have some states that'll hang back and they actually want to see it start to operate, and then they'll think about joining. But I think the most effective way is just to include them in the process and see if you can diffuse that. But it's okay to have skeptics in the room. You want skeptics in the room. You can't have somebody in the room that's totally against this, because they'll throw the process completely off the rails.
And I'll just be very brief and make a couple of comments. I think as it relates to rail, Abe, your question is a very real question that we face, but it's not just about interstate compacts. It's about cities within states and whether cities are competing against states. And I'm going to state the very obvious thing that we all know. This is a complete product of not having a predictable and steady funding stream for rail. This is what happens when all of the rail funding opportunities are through the federal competitive grant arena. This is very different. This is not something that transit and highway folks have to sit around and talk about. So there's my plug. That being said, one thing that is also a product of the IIJA that we can at least point to as it relates to rail compacts is that rail compacts are going to be focused around rail issues. Many DOTs, sometimes I'll say perhaps the more skeptical DOTs about rail, are more invested in pursuing the highway and transit, but usually highway opportunities that are within the larger US DOT multimodal programs. So I'm talking about the megas, the infras, the raises, not so much the CRISI programs, within the US Department of Transportation. So to the extent that there can be definition that a rail compact is actually just about rail issues, let us take this issue, which by the way, we know you don't care too much about, let us take this issue from you and handle it. We're going to go to the FRA. Does not preclude the, furtherance pursuit of a major highway project through any of the other US DOT competitive programs.
Yes,
John Robert,
okay.
go ahead.
Thank you. First of all,
Amendment.
panel, thank you for sharing the information that you did and your stories. And I want to take just a moment and publicly thank Kat Dobbs for what she did for the Gulf Coast route. She corralled, and this was an act of Congress that said, you're going to study this route and come back with a recommendation, which is really kind of how this whole long distance, y'all were looking for such a similar study in this region for one particular corridor. And so these two programs kind of evolved out of that. But Kat was able to corral and shepherd all of the voices in the Gulf South and go hammer and tongs with the freights to ultimately produce a report to Congress that said, yes, run this. Yes, it will be successful. And yes, this is the impact it will have. So Kat, thank you. We would not have ever gotten that far. And the SRC was blessed when it was formed in 1982. The state DOTs didn't want to fool with rail, so they were very happy to have something else created to take on the rail issue. They do sit on the commission, though, in an important part on it. Laura, I had a question for you. You develop a new service you want to start. You've planned it and you've worked with all your partners. Who signs the operating agreement with Amtrak?
Right now, it's the states that do that. MIPIRC is evolving, so I don't know what it's gonna be 10 years from now.
So, because I didn't see the authority to sign operating agreements in the
Right.
list of charges you were given.
I don't, we can accept any funds. I'd have to look into that more. It's not a role our commission has played yet. But we're, again, I didn't really go through it, but we've applied for this Invest Midwest grant that if we do that, then we'll be looking at ridership and revenue forecasts and all those kind of things. We have not, I don't know. We'll figure it out. The Midwest states do own equipment under the umbrella of us, of MIPIRC. So that's the way they were able to do it, is through MIPIRC. But we didn't have to sign any agreements. We're just the umbrella organization. So sometimes we can serve in that way. And that's what we've done so far with the Midwest.
Is that a power that you think would be helpful to you, acting on behalf of a number of states to be able to sign an operating agreement rather than Amtrak having to go to however many states are involved to get the operating agreement? Because the operating agreement really isn't about, I wish Amtrak would change the name of it. It's not about running the train. It's a payment agreement. It's a pay us for the loss of revenue agreement.
Yeah. I'm not sure. I can't answer that right now,
Okay, thank you.
but thank you for your question. I don't mean to be evasive. One thing I want to make sure you all know is that all passenger rail compacts have the power by Congress now. You don't have to get special authorization. Then PREA in 1997 included the ability for interstate passenger rail compacts to support the development of regional rail to come into existence.
Thank you. You know, I hate to cut off this is great conversation, but we do have some other things going. We better have time for it. Thank you to all of our panelists. Well, thank you. Gosh, this has been an amazing summit. Really great group. I appreciate all of you being here. Wanted to just have some closing remarks. And before we do that, a couple of next steps. There is a tour of the Capitol building. If you meet Kathy downstairs here at 3:15, she'll walk over with you to the Capitol building. Representative or Senator Carrie Summerroth is going to give a tour of the Capitol building for anyone who's interested. I think it'll be really great. Also tonight, our host for today, the Boise Metro Chamber, is hosting a closing reception That starts at 6 p.m. at the chamber offices. If you haven't been there, it's about 5 blocks this way, right on the corner of Front and 11th. So Front and 11th, walk down that way, and that's where the closing reception is going to be. And Bruce, I think you have some closing remarks.
Well, thank you, Elaine. On behalf of my Pinward team, Stephanie, Betts, and Andrew, thank you all for coming. This, for many of you, this is the culmination of 2 days of all rail. And yesterday at our summit in Boise, we had the executives, agricultural executives from Union Pacific and BNSF, as well as agricultural interests, talk about the importance of railroads as a backbone to the Northwest economy. That's a particular interest in places like Idaho and Montana, where you really, if you're going to make public and private investments in a rail corridor, you need to have political support from legislators who have connections with the agricultural community. So Pinward, just a quick note, we are a public-private partnership of 5 Northwest states: Alaska, Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Montana, in partnership with Western Canadian provinces and territories, 5 of them. We were formed in 1991. We are a group of state legislators. That's our governing board, and Senator Hasegawa is one of our members. And that's very important because state legislators, we talk about all this federal money, the state legislators are really the key level of government. You've got to get their support for what you want to do in terms of investment. With a grant that we received from the Build America Bureau, we have engaged and will continue to engage with Big Sky and Valley Regional Transit to advance the idea of a network of passenger trains. We've had a lot of history over the years with the Amtrak Cascades. My involvement in passenger rail advocacy goes back to 1995 when we reestablished train service to Vancouver. I think might be before some of you were born, but and it's been great. With that federal grant, we do 2 things. We provide technical assistance to small governments and tribes and others about how to access this very complicated federal $1.2 trillion infrastructure program. And one thing that wasn't said today that Andrew, my colleague, will be glad to share information with you. In addition to the grant programs, there's actually a very cool loan program called RIF Express. And we can help you apply for those grants. You need a revenue stream to retire the loan, but it's a very important program. The only other point I would make is what we try to do, and that's why we've hired Andrew Johnson, former VP of State Affairs for BNSF, and he's brought on Daryl Ness, who's the retired operations manager for BNSF. And we call it high performance rail. It's very simple. It takes a look at public-private investments in rail corridors from first and foremost from the perspective of the railroad. What is it going to take to support their economic opportunities with their clients and their future clients in terms of capacity and operations? And that's unique, and it's something that's very important. As passenger rail advocates, we have to realize it's their real estate, it's their house. If we're inviting ourselves to come into the house, there are rules of engagement. And we're very excited about a particular program, which is grade separations, because those are programs that make the railroad going through community really work better. And that they tend to be orphan programs. And so we specialize in that. And finally, I would say next year, this is our, I think it's our 3rd year with you all. Andrew and I were in Billings, and we're very happy to co-host with you all these last 2 days because it's been very informative. Next year, we invite you, I know you have to discuss it among your folks, to come to Whistler, British Columbia, July 20th to 24th, 2024. And Betts has already been working with Amtrak on getting folks up on the Amtrak Cascades, getting legislators to ride the train to Vancouver, and then possibly a trip up to Whistler on the Rocky Mountaineer, which is a superb tourism train. So hopefully we'll see you all in beautiful Whistler, BC next year.
Thank you, Bruce, and thank you, Panwar. So that brings us to the end. And the last thing I do want to do is a few more thank yous. Those of you who participated for all 4 days know that Penwar hosted their conference here and then co-hosted the Greater Northwest Passenger Rail Summit with us. All aboard Northwest and the Greater Northwest Passenger Rail Working Group and the City of Boise staff did this particular conference. We had lots of sponsorship, including the Chamber of Commerce here in Boise. So final round of applause for all of them and join us on the tour. Thank you.